The bullet that killed Rebecca's husband on their wedding night wasn't meant for him, and that was what started all the talk about the curse. It happened in Nogales, Arizona Territory, on a bitter December evening in 1878 when the wind howled down from the mountains like a living thing. Rebecca Porter had been married for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes when a stray shot from a drunken argument outside the hotel crashed through the window and struck Thomas Porter square in the chest. He died before the preacher who had married them could even finish his prayer. Rebecca, 20 years old and dressed in her mother's altered wedding gown, became a widow before she ever became a wife in anything but name. The townspeople whispered that it was unnatural, that kind of tragedy. When 2 more men who courted Rebecca in the following year met untimely ends, a horse trampling for one and a rattlesnake bite for the other, the whispers became accusations. By the winter of 1880, Rebecca Porter was known throughout Nogales and the surrounding territories as the Winter Widow, a woman cursed to bring death to any man who loved her. She was 22 years old and utterly alone in the world, living in a small cabin 3 miles outside of town that her father had built before the consumption took him when she was 16. She made her living taking in sewing and mending, though fewer and fewer people were willing to bring her their business. They would leave bundles of clothes on her porch with coins wrapped in cloth, collecting the finished work the same way, as if proximity to her might spread the curse like fever. Rebecca accepted this isolation with a dignity that some mistook for coldness, but in truth, her heart broke a little more with each passing day. It was on a frozen morning in January of 1881 when Xander Hawthorne rode into her life, quite literally. His horse had thrown a shoe about a mile from her cabin, and he was leading the limping animal down the rutted road when he saw smoke rising from her chimney. He was a tall man of 24 with sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, his hat pulled low against the wind, a bandana around his neck dusty from travel. He had been driving cattle from Texas to California and had split off from his outfit to visit his sister in Tucson, but a snowstorm had forced him to seek shelter in Nogales. Rebecca was hanging laundry on the line strung between 2 posts in her yard when she saw him approaching. Her immediate instinct was to flee inside, but something in the exhausted slope of his shoulders and the gentle way he spoke to his horse made her pause. She had always been good with animals, and she could see the gelding was favoring his right front hoof badly. "Morning, madam," Xander called out when he was close enough to be heard over the wind. "I am sorry to trouble you, but my horse has lost a shoe. Would you know if there's a farrier nearby, or perhaps a place I could stable him until I can get help?" Rebecca hesitated, clutching a damp sheet to her chest. "The nearest farrier is in town, 3 miles east, but there is a storm coming. You can see it in the way the clouds are gathering over the mountains." Xander looked where she indicated and nodded slowly. "You have a good eye for weather. Would you allow me to shelter my horse in your barn if you have one? I can pay you, and I will be on my way as soon as the weather clears." "I have a small stable," Rebecca said carefully, "but you should know, I am not someone you want to accept help from. People in town will tell you about me if you ask." "I have not asked anyone in town anything," Xander replied. "I am asking you and only about shelter for my horse, though I confess I could use a warm place to wait out the storm myself if you would allow it. I can sleep in the stable with my mount." Rebecca studied him for a long moment. His face was open and honest, with smile lines around his eyes despite his young age. There was no judgment in his expression, only tired hope. Against her better judgment, she nodded toward the small stable behind her cabin. "You can put your horse there. There is hay and water. I will bring you some food, but you should stay in the stable. It is safer that way." "Safer for who?" Xander asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "For you," Rebecca said quietly. And then she turned back to her laundry, ending the conversation. Xander settled his horse, a handsome bay named Copper, into the stable. It was well maintained despite its small size, with clean straw and a tight roof that would keep out the worst of the weather. He found the promised hay and filled the trough with water from the pump outside. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the woman who lived here. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost fragile, with dark red hair that escaped from her bun in wild curls and eyes the color of a summer sky. But there had been such deep sadness in those eyes, and such wariness, that it troubled him. About an hour later, as the first fat snowflakes began to fall, Rebecca appeared in the stable doorway carrying a basket. She set it just inside the door and stepped back quickly, as if afraid to come too close. "There is bread and stew in the jar and coffee in the tin," she said. "The storm should pass by tomorrow." "Thank you kindly, madam," Xander said, moving toward the basket. "This is very generous. Can I ask your name?" "Rebecca Porter," she said, and watched his face carefully for recognition. "Xander Hawthorne," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Porter." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically. "I am a widow. My apologies, Mrs. Porter, and my condolences for your loss." Rebecca's expression shifted to something he could not quite read. "Yes, well, enjoy the food. I will check on you in the morning." She left before he could respond, hurrying back through the thickening snow to her cabin. Xander watched her go, noting the way she held herself so carefully upright, as if afraid that relaxing even slightly would cause her to shatter. He had met many people in his years of traveling with cattle outfits, but there was something about Rebecca Porter that caught at his attention in a way he could not quite explain. The stew was excellent, rich with beef and vegetables, and the bread was fresh. As Xander ate, sitting on a clean bale of hay with his back against the stable wall, he found himself thinking about the strange encounter. Why had she warned him? What did she mean about it being safer if he stayed away from her? The questions circled in his mind as the wind howled outside and the snow began to pile up against the stable door. That night, Xander slept surprisingly well despite the cold, wrapped in his bedroll with Copper's warmth nearby. He woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the gaps in the stable walls and the sound of someone working nearby. When he emerged, brushing straw from his clothes, he found Rebecca scattering feed for a small flock of chickens. She looked up at his approach, and he saw dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept as well as he had. "Good morning," he said. "The storm passed, just as you predicted." "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "The road to town should be passable by midday, once the sun has had time to work on the snow." "About that," Xander said, moving a bit closer. Rebecca took a small step back, and he stopped immediately. "My horse still needs a new shoe." "I was thinking if you would allow it, I could stay another day or so. I am handy with repairs, and I noticed your porch has some loose boards. I could fix those in exchange for the lodging. I would still stay in the stable, of course." Rebecca shook her head. "That is not necessary. You do not owe me anything." "I know I do not owe you," Xander said gently, "but I would like to help anyway, unless my presence here troubles you." "It is not your presence that troubles me," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is what might happen because of it, Mrs. Porter," Xander said, and there was something in his tone that made her look up and meet his eyes. "I do not know what has happened to make you afraid, but I promise you, I am not a man who scares easily, and I would very much like to fix your porch if you will let me. No strings attached, no expectations, just one person helping another." Rebecca wanted to refuse. Every instinct she had developed over the past 2 years told her to send him away, to protect him from whatever darkness seemed to follow her. But there was something in his steady gaze and calm demeanor that made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. And her porch did need fixing, along with a dozen other repairs she could not manage on her own. "All right," she said finally. "You can stay until your horse is shod and the repairs are done. But Mr. Hawthorne, you should know what people say about me. They call me the Winter Widow. They say I am cursed, that men who get close to me die. 3 men have already paid that price." Xander was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he said something that Rebecca never expected to hear. "That sounds like terrible luck, and I am sorry you have had to endure it. But I do not believe in curses, Mrs. Porter. I believe in probability and coincidence and the random cruelty of the world sometimes. And I believe that you have been carrying a burden that is not yours to carry. So if you will allow me, I would like to fix your porch and anything else that needs fixing, and then I will go on my way, and you will have to find some other reason to explain why I did not drop dead at your feet." Rebecca stared at him, something painful and hopeful rising in her chest. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Hawthorne." "My sister tells me I am a bit of both," Xander said with a small smile. "Now, where do you keep your tools?" Over the next few days, Xander proved to be as good as his word. He repaired the porch, fixed the stable door that had been hanging crooked, and reinforced the chicken coop against predators. Rebecca found herself watching him work from her kitchen window, admiring the efficient way he moved and the care he took with even the smallest task. She brought him meals and coffee, and slowly, very slowly, she began to stay a bit longer each time, talking with him while he worked. Xander learned that Rebecca had been born in Missouri but had come west with her family when she was 10, seeking better opportunities. Her mother had died during the journey, and her father had settled in Nogales, working as a carpenter until the consumption took him. She had been engaged to Thomas Porter since she was 18, waiting until she turned 20 to marry as her father had wished. Thomas had been a good man, a merchant's son with gentle hands and kind eyes. "He wanted to build a house for us," Rebecca said one afternoon as Xander worked on replacing a broken window frame. He had already bought the land, just on the edge of town. After he died, his family sold it. "I do not blame them. They lost their son. And you lost your husband," Xander said quietly. "That grief deserves recognition too." Rebecca looked away, blinking back sudden tears. The other 2 men, Samuel and Robert, they were kind as well. Samuel was a rancher who brought me sewing work. He courted me for months before I agreed to let him take me to a dance. His horse spooked and trampled him 3 days later. Robert was a banker who had recently moved to Nogales. He said he did not believe in curses. He asked me to marry him, and I refused, but he was persistent. A week after his proposal, he was bitten by a rattlesnake while riding out to see me. He died before he could make it back to town. "That is a terrible string of bad luck," Xander acknowledged. "But luck is what it is, Mrs. Porter, random and senseless. It is not your fault, any more than it would be your fault if lightning struck them." "The town does not see it that way," Rebecca said bitterly. "They see a pattern. 3 men, all dead after showing interest in the widow. Some of the more superstitious folks have started leaving sage bundles on my porch, as if I am some kind of evil spirit that needs to be warded off." Xander set down his hammer and turned to face her fully. "Then the town is full of fools who would rather believe in magic than face the fact that terrible things sometimes happen to good people for no reason at all. You are not cursed, Mrs. Porter. You are just someone who has had more than her share of sorrow." "How can you be so sure?" Rebecca asked, and there was desperate hope in her voice. "Because I have been here nearly a week, and I am still breathing," Xander said with a slight smile. "And because I have seen the way you care for your animals, and the quality of your work, and the kindness you have shown to a stranger despite your fear. A cursed woman would not put so much love into the world. She would not feed hungry chickens with such care or mend clothes with such precise stitches. You are not cursed, Rebecca Porter. You are blessed with a good heart that has been broken too many times." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made something flutter in Rebecca's chest. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not pity but genuine respect and something else, something warmer that she was afraid to name. "You should go to town tomorrow," she said abruptly. "Get your horse shod and be on your way. The longer you stay, the more people will talk and the more danger you might be in." "I am not afraid of talk," Xander said, "and I am not afraid of you. But I will go to town tomorrow if that is what you wish. I will take Copper to the farrier and pick up some supplies. Is there anything you need?" Rebecca hesitated, then said, "Thread, if you would not mind. Blue and black, and needles if they have them. I will give you money." "You will not give me anything," Xander said firmly. "You have been feeding me and housing me for a week. The least I can do is bring you some supplies." The next morning, Xander saddled Copper, who had recovered well from his initial lameness, and headed into Nogales. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with wooden buildings and covered walkways. He found the farrier easily, a gruff man named Tom who looked at him with curiosity when Xander mentioned he had been staying at the Porter place. "You have been out at the winter widow's cabin?" Tom asked, his eyebrows rising. "And you are still walking around healthy?" "Why would I not be?" Xander replied evenly. Tom shrugged and went to work on Copper's hoof. "Just saying, that woman has a reputation. 3 men dead all because they got too close to her. Some folks say she is cursed. Others say she is doing it on purpose, though I cannot imagine how or why." "Some folks should mind their own business," Xander said, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "Mrs. Porter is a kind woman who has had terrible luck. That is all." Tom glanced at him and then went back to his work, wisely choosing not to continue the conversation. While he waited, Xander walked to the general store and purchased the thread and needles Rebecca had requested, along with some coffee, sugar, and a bag of peppermints he thought she might enjoy. The shopkeeper, a pinched woman named Mrs. Dawson, gave him the same curious look when he mentioned where he was staying. "You are the cowboy who has been living out at the Porter place," she said, and it was not a question. "Word travels fast in a small town." "I have been doing some repairs in exchange for lodging," Xander confirmed. "Mrs. Porter has been very hospitable." "That girl has brought nothing but trouble to this town," Mrs. Dawson said, her mouth pursing. 3 good men dead, and who knows how many more if people keep ignoring the warning signs. Xander set the supplies on the counter with deliberate care. "The only warning sign I see is how quick people are to blame a woman for tragedies she had no part in causing. Mrs. Porter lost her husband on her wedding night. She watched 2 other men who cared for her die in accidents. That is grief upon grief, and instead of showing her compassion, this town has decided to treat her like a pariah. You should all be ashamed of yourselves." Mrs. Dawson's face flushed red. "Now you listen here, young man. We have every right to protect ourselves from unnatural things." "There is nothing unnatural about Rebecca Porter except the cruelty she has been shown," Xander said flatly. "How much do I owe you for these supplies?" The transaction was completed in tense silence. As Xander left the store, he was aware of people staring at him from doorways and windows. He collected Copper from the farrier, paid the man, and rode back toward Rebecca's cabin with a growing anger burning in his chest. He had seen mob mentality before, had watched people turn on each other out of fear and superstition, but it never failed to disgust him. When he arrived back at the cabin, Rebecca was sitting on the newly repaired porch, mending a shirt. She looked up at his approach and immediately seemed to read his mood. "They told you, did they not?" she said quietly, "about the curse. They told me that this town is full of small-minded fools who would rather believe in ghost stories than show basic human decency," Xander said, dismounting and bringing her the supplies. "Here, your thread and needles and a few other things I thought you might like." Rebecca took the package with trembling hands. When she saw the peppermints, her eyes filled with tears. "You did not have to do this." "I wanted to," Xander said. He sat down on the porch steps, a careful distance away but closer than he had been before. "Mrs. Porter, Rebecca, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, waiting. "I am not afraid of you," he continued, "and I do not believe you are cursed, but more than that, I have come to care about what happens to you. These past few days, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness despite everything you have been through, it has meant something to me. I know I am probably 10 kinds of fool for saying this, and I know you have every reason to send me away, but I would like to stay. Not just for another day or two, but for as long as you will have me." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. "Xander, no, you do not know what you are saying. Every man who has cared for me has died. I could not bear it if something happened to you too." "Then maybe it is time to break the pattern," Xander said. "Maybe it is time to stop believing that you are responsible for random tragedy and start believing that you deserve happiness. Because you do, Rebecca. You deserve to be loved and cherished and protected, not shunned and feared." "What if you are wrong?" Rebecca whispered. "What if there really is something wrong with me, something that brings death to anyone who gets close?" Xander stood and walked to where she sat. He held out his hand, and after a long moment, Rebecca took it. His hand was warm and calloused from work, and his grip was steady. "Then I will die knowing I spent my last days with someone extraordinary," he said simply. "But I do not think I am wrong. I think I am going to live a long, happy life, and I would very much like to spend it with you if you will have me." Rebecca looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You really do not believe in the curse?" "I believe in you," Xander said, "and I believe in us. That is enough." She stood, still holding his hand, and for the first time in 2 years, Rebecca allowed herself to hope. "I am afraid." "I know," Xander said gently, "but I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to, and even then I might argue about it." Despite herself, Rebecca laughed, a small broken sound that turned into a sob. Xander pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and crying for all the loss and loneliness and fear she had carried for so long. He held her while she wept, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances that she was not alone anymore, that he was there, that everything would be all right. When the storm of tears finally passed, Rebecca pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I have gotten your shirt all wet." "It will dry," Xander said with a smile. "Are you all right?" "I think so," Rebecca said. She took a shaky breath. "Xander, if you are truly serious about staying, there are things you should know. I have very little money. I make enough from sewing to survive, but it is not much. And if you are seen with me, the town will turn on you too. You heard what they think of me." "I do not care what they think," Xander said. "And as for money, I have some saved up from my work. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to get by. I can find work around here, ranching or handyman jobs. We will manage." "You would give up driving cattle to stay here with me?" Rebecca asked, searching his face. "I have been driving cattle since I was 15, Xander said. "It is good work, but it is lonely. Always moving, never putting down roots. I have been thinking lately that I would like to settle somewhere, build something lasting. And then I met you, and I thought, maybe this is where I am supposed to be." Rebecca felt her heart expanding in her chest, a feeling she had thought she would never experience again. "I do not understand how you can be so certain after such a short time." "Some things you just know," Xander said. "The first time I saw you hanging laundry in the wind, trying to be strong even though I could see how alone you were, something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like." "I cannot explain it better than that." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I feel it too. It terrifies me." "Then we will be terrified together," Xander said. "What do you say, Rebecca Porter? Will you give me a chance? Will you give us a chance?" Rebecca thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the ways this could end in tragedy. But she also thought about how alive she felt when Xander was near, how his presence had brought light back into her dark world. She thought about his steady hands and kind eyes and the way he had defended her to the townspeople without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will give us a chance." Xander's face split into a wide grin. "Yeah? Yeah," Rebecca said and found herself smiling back. "But you have to promise me something. Anything. If anything starts to feel wrong, if you get sick or injured or anything at all seems off, you have to leave. Promise me you will save yourself if it comes to that." "Rebecca," Xander said seriously, "I promise you that I will take care of myself, but I am not going to run at the first sign of trouble. We are in this together now, whatever comes." It was not quite what Rebecca wanted to hear, but she could see from the set of his jaw that it was the best she was going to get. She nodded, accepting it, and Xander squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Over the following weeks, Xander made himself indispensable around the cabin. He repaired everything that needed fixing, chopped enough wood to last through the rest of winter, and even built an addition to the chicken coop that doubled its size. Rebecca found herself relying on his presence, looking forward to their meals together and the long conversations they had in the evenings by the fire. They talked about everything. Xander told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 4 children. His father had been a rancher who died when Xander was 12, leaving the family struggling. His older brothers had taken over the ranch, but Xander had always been restless, wanting to see what lay beyond the horizon. He had hired on with a cattle outfit at 15 and had been working his way across the West ever since. "My sister married a banker in Tucson," he told Rebecca one night. "She keeps writing me letters telling me to settle down, find a good woman, give her nieces and nephews to spoil. I always wrote back saying I was too young, too busy, too committed to the trail. But the truth was I just had not found the right person yet." "And now?" Rebecca asked softly. "Now I have," Xander said, looking at her with those whiskey-colored eyes. "If she will have me, that is." Their courtship was slow and careful, both of them aware of the weight of Rebecca's history. Xander never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. They held hands while walking around the property, sat close together by the fire, shared shy kisses that grew gradually less shy as the days passed. Rebecca found herself falling in love with him, truly in love, in a way that was different from what she had felt for Thomas. That had been young love, sweet and uncomplicated. This was deeper, forged in the fire of loss and fear and choosing to be brave anyway. But the outside world could not be ignored forever. In early March, about 2 months after Xander had first arrived at Rebecca's cabin, a group of men from town rode out to see them. Rebecca saw them coming and felt ice form in her stomach. "They are here to warn you away," she told Xander. "Please just listen to them. Do not make this worse." "I am not going anywhere," Xander said firmly, "but I will hear what they have to say." The group consisted of 5 men, including the farrier Tom and a rancher named James who had been friends with Samuel, one of Rebecca's dead suitors. They dismounted in front of the cabin, their faces grim. "Hawthorne," James said without preamble, "we have come to talk some sense into you." "I am listening," Xander said, standing on the porch with his arms crossed. "You have been living out here with the winter widow for near 2 months now," Tom said. "We figured at first you did not know about her reputation, but you have been into town. You know what she is." "She is a woman who has survived more grief than any person should have to endure," Xander said evenly. "That is what she is. She is cursed," James said flatly. "And if you keep courting her, you are going to end up just like Thomas and Samuel and Robert, dead before your time." "I appreciate your concern," Xander said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But I am a grown man capable of making my own decisions. And I have decided that Rebecca Porter is the finest woman I have ever met, and I intend to marry her if she will have me." There was a shocked silence. Even Rebecca gasped from where she stood in the cabin doorway. "You are insane," one of the other men said. "You will not live to see the wedding night." "Then I will die a happy man," Xander replied. "But I do not think I will die at all because the curse you all believe in does not exist. It is a fiction you have created to explain random tragedy, and in doing so, you have tortured an innocent woman. You should all be ashamed. We are trying to save your life," James said angrily. "I do not need saving," Xander shot back. "What I need is for you all to leave my property and stop harassing the woman I love." "Your property?" Tom asked skeptically. "Our property," Xander corrected. "Rebecca has agreed to marry me, and when she does, this land and everything on it will belong to both of us. So yes, our property, and you are not welcome here." The men exchanged glances. Finally, James shook his head. "Your funeral, Hawthorne, but do not say we did not warn you." They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Xander turned to find Rebecca staring at him with wide eyes. "You told them we are getting married," she said faintly. "I know I should have asked you properly first," Xander said, suddenly looking nervous. "But it felt right to say it, to claim it out loud. Rebecca, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you sing to the chickens when you think no one is listening. I love the little crease you get between your eyebrows when you are concentrating on sewing, and the way you take your coffee with just a little bit of sugar. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So, will you marry me? Properly and officially?" Rebecca pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammering beneath her palm. "Xander, are you certain? After what those men said, after all the warnings?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Xander said. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I know you are afraid. I know your history terrifies you. But look at me, Rebecca. I am here. I am healthy and whole and standing in front of you declaring my love. Does not that count for something? Does not that prove that maybe, just maybe, the curse was never real?" Rebecca looked at him, this brave, foolish, wonderful man who had crashed into her life like a meteor and changed everything. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to protect you, but I cannot help it. I love you, Xander Hawthorne." "Then marry me," Xander urged. "Let us build a life together. Let us prove to this whole town that love is stronger than superstition." "Yes," Rebecca said, and then louder, "Yes, I will marry you." Xander swept her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and for the first time in years, Rebecca felt truly, completely happy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "We should go into town tomorrow," he said. "Talk to the preacher, make it official." "The preacher will not want to marry us," Rebecca said. "He is the one who married Thomas and me. He feels guilty about what happened." "Then we will find someone who will," Xander said stubbornly. "A judge, a justice of the peace, anyone with the authority to make it legal. I am not waiting months for this, Rebecca. I want you to be my wife." "I want that too," Rebecca admitted. "But Xander, the town's reaction will be terrible. They will shun you just like they shun me." "Let them," Xander said fiercely. "I do not need their approval. I only need you." The next day they rode into Nogales together, Rebecca seated behind Xander on Copper. The sight of them together caused quite a stir. People stopped in the street to stare and whisper. Some made signs to ward off evil. But Xander ignored all of it, keeping his eyes forward as they rode to the small courthouse at the end of the main street. The justice of the peace was a man named Albert, a transplant from Missouri who had only been in Nogales for 6 months. He listened to their request with raised eyebrows but no immediate refusal. "I have heard the stories about you, Mrs. Porter," he said carefully. "But I have also seen how this town treats you, and I do not hold with persecution based on superstition. If you two want to marry, I will perform the ceremony. But I have to ask, young man, are you certain about this? The talk will not be kind." "I am more certain of this than anything else in my life," Xander said, gripping Rebecca's hand tightly. "We want to marry today if possible. We can pay whatever fee you require." Albert studied them both, then nodded slowly. "All right then, I will need 2 witnesses. Let me see if I can find some." He stepped out of the courthouse and returned a few minutes later with an older woman named Martha and her husband Eugene. They were newer to town as well and agreed to witness the ceremony without judgment. Albert retrieved his book and led them through the simple ceremony right there in the courthouse. When it came time for the vows, Xander looked into Rebecca's eyes and spoke from his heart. "I promise to love you through every season, to stand beside you through every storm, to be your partner and your protector for as long as I live. You are my home, Rebecca, and I will spend every day proving that to you." Rebecca's voice shook as she replied, "I promise to love you with all my heart, to trust in us even when fear tells me not to build a life with you filled with hope instead of sorrow. You have given me back my faith in tomorrow, Xander, and I will treasure that gift forever." Albert pronounced them husband and wife, and Xander kissed Rebecca with such tenderness that even Martha wiped away a tear. They signed the necessary papers, paid the fee, and walked out of the courthouse as Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne. The ride back to the cabin, their cabin now, was quiet but peaceful. Rebecca leaned against Xander's back, her arms wrapped around his waist, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. They had done it. They were married. And Xander was alive and well, showing no signs of the curse that had supposedly claimed her previous suitors. That night, they celebrated their union properly, and it was everything Rebecca had dreamed of, but never thought she would experience. Xander was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Rebecca felt a peace she had not known since before her father's death. The next few weeks were blissful despite the town's continued hostility. Xander found work with a rancher outside of town who cared more about a man's work ethic than his choice of wife. The money was good, and he was usually home by sunset. Rebecca continued her sewing work, and together they began to build a real life. But the universe was not done testing them yet. In late April, about a month after their wedding, Xander came home from work with a fever. Rebecca's blood turned to ice when she saw how flushed his face was, how he swayed slightly in the saddle as he dismounted. "It is nothing," he insisted when she rushed to help him. "Just a chill from working in the rain today. I will be fine by morning." But he was not fine by morning. The fever worsened, and by the second day, Xander was delirious. Rebecca nursed him frantically, applying cool cloths to his burning skin, forcing water and willow bark tea down his throat. All the while, Her mind screamed that the curse was real, that she had killed him just like the others, that she should have known better than to believe in happiness. On the third day, as Xander thrashed in fevered dreams, Rebecca broke down. She knelt beside their bed, praying to a God she was not sure was listening, begging for his life, offering to trade her own if necessary. She promised that if Xander survived, she would leave him, would disappear so he could be safe, anything to keep him alive. But it was not prayer that saved Xander. It was the passage of time and his own strong constitution. On the morning of the fourth day, the fever broke. He opened his eyes, clear and aware, and found Rebecca slumped in a chair beside the bed, dark circles under her eyes from days without sleep. "Rebecca," he croaked, his voice rough from disuse. She startled awake and immediately moved to his side, pressing her hand to his forehead. It was cool, normal. She burst into tears. "You are all right," she sobbed. "You are all right. I thought I had lost you. I thought the curse was real after all and I had killed you." "Hey, hey," Xander said weakly, reaching for her hand. "I am here. It was just a fever, sweetheart. People get sick sometimes. It does not mean anything except that I was foolish enough to work in cold rain without proper covering." "You were so sick," Rebecca whispered. "I was so afraid." "I know," Xander said, pulling her down to rest her head on his chest. "But I am still here. The curse did not get me. Do you understand what this means? I got sick, really sick, the kind of sick that could have killed me, and I survived." "Because there is no curse, Rebecca. There never was." Rebecca wanted to believe him. As the days passed and Xander regained his strength, she began to allow herself to hope that maybe he was right. Maybe it really had just been terrible coincidence, and maybe their love was strong enough to overcome the shadow of the past. By summer, Xander was fully recovered and back to work. Their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rebecca's sewing business actually grew as some of the newer families in town, the ones who had not been around for the previous tragedies, began to bring her work. Xander's reputation as a hard worker spread, and he was able to find steady employment on various ranches around Nogales. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rebecca shared news that filled her with both joy and terror. "Xander, I am pregnant." He turned to her sharply, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Rebecca said. "I have known for a few weeks, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." Xander let out a whoop of joy and lifted her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. When he set her down, his face was radiant with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Rebecca, this is the best news. This is perfect." "I am scared," Rebecca admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if the curse affects the baby?" "There is no curse," Xander said firmly, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands. "Our baby is going to be healthy and perfect, just like their mother. You are going to be an amazing parent, and I am going to do my best to keep up. This is a blessing, Rebecca. The first of many." His confidence was infectious. As the months passed, and Rebecca's belly swelled with life, she found herself believing more and more that maybe their happiness was real, that maybe she truly had broken free from the shadow of the past. Xander was attentive and excited, talking to the baby through Rebecca's stomach, already planning the future. In early February of 1882, during a cold snap that reminded Rebecca of the winter when she had first met Xander, she went into labor. Xander rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in Nogales. Despite Rebecca's reputation, Sarah agreed to come without hesitation. The labor was long and difficult. Rebecca labored through the night and into the next day, with Xander holding her hand and whispering encouragement while Sarah worked efficiently. Just as the sun was setting on the second day, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to anyone within hearing distance. "A boy," Sarah said, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Rebecca's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Rebecca looked down at her son, counting his tiny fingers and toes, marveling at his perfect features. Xander peered over her shoulder, his face wet with tears. "He is beautiful," Xander said hoarsely. "You are both beautiful. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas, after Rebecca's first husband, a gesture that Xander insisted on. "He was a good man who loved you," Xander said. "Our son should carry his name as a way of honoring that." Rebecca cried when he said it, touched beyond words by his generosity of spirit. Little Thomas Hawthorne was welcomed into the world with more love than seemed possible. As Rebecca recovered from the birth, word spread through Nogales about the baby. Some of the townspeople softened their stance. After all, Xander had been with Rebecca for over a year now and had survived a serious illness. Maybe the curse had been broken, or maybe it had never existed at all. A few brave souls even came to the cabin with gifts for the baby, small gestures of peace that Rebecca accepted with cautious gratitude. The first year of Thomas's life was the happiest Rebecca had ever known. Xander proved to be a devoted father, patient with the baby's crying and happy to help with all the messy, exhausting work of caring for an infant. Their home was filled with laughter and love, and slowly, so slowly Rebecca almost did not notice it happening, the townspeople began to treat them like normal residents of Nogales. By the time Thomas was 2, the whispers about the winter widow had faded to occasional murmurs. Xander had become well respected in the area for his skill with horses and his honest work ethic. Rebecca's sewing business was thriving. They had even begun attending church again, sitting in the back pew but welcomed nonetheless. One Sunday after services, the preacher who had married Rebecca and Thomas Porter all those years ago approached them. He was an older man now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were kind as he looked at Rebecca holding young Thomas while Xander stood beside her. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. For years I believed the worst about you. I thought your tragedies were somehow deserved, or at least that you were dangerous to be near. I was wrong, and I am sorry. You are clearly blessed, not cursed, and I should have seen that from the beginning." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know." The preacher nodded and reached out to gently touch little Thomas's head. "This boy is lucky to have you both as parents. I pray God blesses your family with many more years of happiness." As they walked home from church, Rebecca leaned against Xander's shoulder. "Did you hear what he called me? Blessed instead of cursed, just like you always said." "I told you," Xander said smugly. "I am always right about these things." Rebecca laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "Do not get too cocky, Cowboy. You still have years of me proving you wrong ahead of you." "I cannot wait," Xander said, pulling her close and kissing her temple. They decided to expand their family. In the fall of 1884, Rebecca gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace. The births were easier than Thomas's had been, and both girls were healthy and loud. Xander was outnumbered now, he joked, 1 man against 3 women and whatever Thomas turned out to be. But he seemed delighted by the chaos, bouncing a daughter on each knee while Thomas climbed on his back. Life was not without its challenges. Money was sometimes tight, especially with 3 children to feed and clothe. There were illnesses, the usual childhood coughs and fevers that terrified Rebecca even though they always passed. There were harsh winters and dry summers that made work scarce. But through it all, Rebecca and Xander faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. When Thomas was 6 and the twins were 4, Xander surprised Rebecca by announcing he had saved enough money to buy a piece of land just outside town. It was 20 acres with good water and decent grazing, enough for them to run some cattle and horses of their own rather than Xander working for other people's ranches. "It is not much," he said as they stood on the property, the children running wild through the tall grass. "But it is ours. We can build a proper house, maybe even hire some help eventually. What do you think?" Rebecca looked around at the land that would be theirs, then at her husband who had given her everything, who had seen past fear and superstition to the woman beneath. "I think it is perfect." "I think you are perfect. I think our whole life is perfect. Even when Thomas tracks mud through the house," Xander teased. "Even then," Rebecca confirmed. They built their house over the course of a year, with Xander doing most of the work himself with help from a few of the men in town who had become genuine friends. It was a simple structure, but it was solid and warm and full of love. They moved in during the spring of 1886, and Rebecca cried happy tears as she arranged their furniture and hung curtains in the windows. That summer, as they celebrated Thomas's 7th birthday with a small party that included several families from town, Rebecca stood back and watched the scene with wonder. Children ran and played, adults talked and laughed, and in the center of it all was Xander, her husband, alive and healthy and happy. The man who had looked at the winter widow and called her blessed instead. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Rebecca and Xander sat on their new porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sun and home. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked quietly. "If you had listened to the warnings, if you had ridden away that first day instead of staying to fix my porch." "Sometimes," Xander admitted. "But then I look at what we have built together, and I cannot imagine any other life. You and the children, this land, this home, it is everything I never knew I wanted. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca." "You saved me," Rebecca said softly. "I was drowning in grief and fear and loneliness, and you threw me a lifeline. You believed in me when no one else did. You saw me when everyone else looked away." "You saved yourself," Xander corrected gently. "I just reminded you that you were worth saving. You did the hard work of healing, of choosing to love again despite your fear. I am proud of you, you know, proud of your courage and your strength." Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole world. "I love you, Xander Hawthorne. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Xander said, kissing her softly. "My blessed wife, my Rebecca." The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew into a serious, intelligent boy who loved reading and learning. The twins were complete opposites, Emma quiet and thoughtful while Grace was wild and adventurous. In 1888, Rebecca gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel after one of the men who had died. It was a way of honoring his memory and showing that Rebecca had truly made peace with the past. By 1890, Xander and Rebecca's ranch had become one of the most successful in the area. They ran a modest herd of cattle and had developed a reputation for raising quality horses. Xander had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Rebecca had expanded her sewing business to include teaching young women in town how to sew properly. On their 9th wedding anniversary, Xander presented Rebecca with a gift that made her gasp. It was a delicate silver locket engraved with both of their initials and the date they had married. Inside were tiny photographs of each of their children. "Xander, this is too much," Rebecca protested even as she clutched the locket to her chest. "Nothing is too much for you," Xander said. You are my heart, Rebecca. You always will be." That night, as they celebrated privately after putting the children to bed, Rebecca marveled at how completely her life had changed. She had gone from the shunned winter widow to a respected member of the community, from believing herself cursed to knowing she was blessed beyond measure. The town of Nogales had changed too. The superstitious fear that had gripped it in the early 1880s had faded. Rebecca and Xander's obvious happiness and growing family had shown everyone that there had never been any curse, only tragic coincidence. Some of the older residents still remembered the dark days, but even they had come to accept that they had been wrong. In 1892, Thomas turned 13 and announced he wanted to become a doctor. Rebecca and Xander were supportive, even though it meant saving money for medical school. The twins were 10 and already showing their distinct personalities, Emma drawn to teaching and Grace to ranching. Little Samuel, now 4, was a cheerful child who followed his father everywhere. One evening that fall, as Rebecca and Xander sat on their porch watching the sunset, a familiar ritual after all these years, Rebecca said something she had been thinking about for a while. "I want to tell you about Thomas, my first husband. Really tell you, not just the facts, but who he was." Xander took her hand. "I would like that." Rebecca talked for a long time, sharing memories of Thomas Porter that she had locked away for years. His love of music, even though he could not carry a tune. The way he always brought her wildflowers he picked on his way to see her. His dreams for their future, the house he wanted to build, the children he hoped they would have. "He was a good man," Rebecca said finally, "and I loved him. But Xander, what we have is different, deeper. We built this together from nothing, fought for it, chose it every single day. I love you in a way I did not know was possible back then." "I am glad you had Thomas, even briefly," Xander said. "He helped shape you into the woman I fell in love with. And I am honored that you named our son after him. It shows the size of your heart, that you can hold both past and present with equal love. That is because you taught me that love is not finite," Rebecca said. "That choosing to love again does not diminish what came before. You taught me so much, Xander, how to be brave, how to hope, how to believe in tomorrow." "And you taught me what it means to truly commit to someone," Xander replied. "To build a life, not just drift through one. Before you, I was content to wander. Now I cannot imagine being anywhere but here, with you and our children, on this land we made our own." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear the children getting ready for bed, their voices raised in the usual nighttime arguments about who got which blanket and whose turn it was to blow out the lamp. It was normal, domestic, beautiful. In 1895, when Thomas was 16 and preparing to leave for medical school in the fall, the family received unexpected visitors. Xander's sister and her husband arrived from Tucson with their 3 children, wanting to finally meet the family they had only heard about in letters. "You were right," Xander's sister Margaret said to Rebecca one afternoon while they were preparing dinner together. "My brother wrote me years ago that he had found the finest woman in the world, and I thought he was exaggerating the way men in love do. But he was not. You are extraordinary, Rebecca. What you have built here, the way you have raised these children, the life you and Xander share, it is truly something special." "I am just living," Rebecca said, embarrassed by the praise. "Doing what any mother and wife would do." "No," Margaret said firmly. "What you are doing is thriving despite everything that tried to break you. Xander told me about what you went through, about the town turning on you, about the so-called curse. A lesser woman would have given up, hidden away forever. But you fought back by living well, by loving fully. That takes incredible strength." Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. Your brother gave me the courage to fight. He saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I could not believe in myself. I owe him everything." "You owe him nothing," Margaret said. "Love is not a debt. It is a gift you give freely. And from what I can see, you both give generously." The visit from Xander's family was a joyful 2 weeks filled with laughter and connection. When they finally left to return to Tucson, Rebecca felt fuller somehow, more connected to the wider world beyond their ranch. Thomas left for medical school in September, and Rebecca cried for 3 days straight despite knowing it was a wonderful opportunity. Xander held her each night, letting her grieve the loss of their boy's daily presence while celebrating the man he was becoming. The twins stepped up to help more around the ranch, and Samuel, now 7, took his role as the youngest remaining child seriously, trying to be helpful in ways that were both endearing and occasionally disastrous. Life continued its steady rhythm. In 1897, tragedy struck the town of Nogales in the form of an influenza outbreak. Many people fell ill, including both of the twins. Rebecca and Xander nursed Emma and Grace around the clock, terrified they would lose their daughters. For weeks, the outcome was uncertain. During this time, Rebecca found herself praying again, not bargaining with God like she had when Xander was sick, but simply asking for strength to face whatever came. She had learned over the years that she could not control fate, could not prevent every tragedy, but she could choose how she responded to it. By the grace of good nursing and strong constitutions, both girls recovered. Emma bounced back quickly, but Grace took longer, her adventurous spirit temporarily dimmed by lingering weakness. The experience changed something in Grace. When she was fully recovered, she announced that she wanted to become a nurse, to help people the way her parents had helped her. "I want to do something that matters," she told Rebecca. "Something more than just working the ranch." "Then you should," Rebecca said without hesitation. "Follow your heart, sweet girl. Your father and I will support you whatever you choose." Xander agreed, and they began making plans for Grace to attend nursing school when she was old enough. Emma, meanwhile, had found her calling teaching the younger children at the small school in Nogales. She started as an assistant at 15 and proved to be a natural educator. By 1900, as a new century dawned, the Hawthorne family had become pillars of the Nogales community. Thomas was finishing medical school and planning to return to Arizona to practice. Emma was a full teacher now, beloved by her students. Grace was preparing to leave for nursing school in Tucson. And Samuel, at 12, was showing signs of becoming an exceptional horseman like his father. On New Year's Day of 1900, Rebecca and Xander threw a party at their ranch to celebrate the new century. It seemed like half of Nogales showed up, people they had known for years, and some newer residents who had heard of the Hawthornes' hospitality. As Rebecca looked around at the crowd filling her home and yard, she was struck by how impossible this would have seemed 20 years earlier when she was the shunned winter widow living alone in a tiny cabin. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Rebecca found Xander in the stable checking on the horses, an old habit from his cowboy days. "There you are," she said, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. "I was wondering where you had disappeared to." "Just making sure everything was settled for the night," Xander said, turning in her embrace to face her. "It was a good party. I think people enjoyed themselves." "It was perfect," Rebecca agreed. She studied his face, still handsome at 43 though now marked with lines that spoke of years lived fully. "Can you believe it has been 19 years since you first rode up to my cabin with a lame horse?" "Best decision I ever made stopping there," Xander said, pulling her close. "Well, that and refusing to leave no matter how many times you tried to warn me away." "You were stubborn," Rebecca said fondly. I was in love, Xander corrected. From almost the very first moment I saw you, something in me just knew, Rebecca. Knew that you were my future, my home, my everything. Rebecca reached up to cup his face in her hands. You changed my life. You took a broken, frightened woman and showed her she could be whole again. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me everything, Xander. We gave each other everything, Xander said. That is what partnership means. That is what love means. They stood there in the quiet stable, holding each other as they had done countless times over the years, drawing strength and comfort from their closeness. Outside, the new century waited with all its possibilities and challenges. But in that moment, all that mattered was this: two people who had chosen each other against all odds and built a life more beautiful than either had dared to dream. Thomas returned from medical school in 1902 and opened a practice in Nogales, quickly becoming the most trusted doctor in the area. He married a lovely young woman named Catherine, a teacher he had met in medical school, and they settled in a house in town. Rebecca delighted in having her eldest close again. Grace finished nursing school and surprised everyone by deciding to work with her brother in his practice, rather than moving to a larger city. Why would I go somewhere else when the people I love are here? She said simply when asked. Emma continued teaching and eventually married a rancher named David who owned land adjacent to the Hawthorne property. Samuel showed no interest in leaving at all, content to work the ranch with his father and learn everything Xander could teach him about horses and cattle. In 1905, Thomas and Catherine presented Rebecca and Xander with their first grandchild, a boy they named Xander Thomas. Rebecca wept when she heard the name, touched beyond words. Grace and her husband, a doctor she had met through Thomas, followed with twin daughters in 1906. Emma and David had a son in 1907, and Samuel, who married young at 19, had a daughter in 1908. Suddenly, Rebecca and Xander's house was full of grandchildren every Sunday for family dinners. The noise and chaos were wonderful, a far cry from the lonely silence that had once defined Rebecca's life. Xander thrived on it, always willing to bounce a baby on his knee or tell the older children stories about his days driving cattle. On Rebecca's 50th birthday in 1908, her family threw her a surprise party. As she stood in her living room surrounded by her husband, their 4 children, their children's spouses, and 6 grandchildren, Rebecca felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "I need to say something," she announced, and the room quieted. "When I was 22 years old, I believed my life was over. I believed I was cursed to live alone, that anyone who loved me would die. I had given up on happiness, on family, on everything that makes life worth living. And then a stubborn cowboy with a lame horse showed up at my door and refused to believe in curses." She looked at Xander, who was watching her with soft eyes. "You saved my life, Xander Hawthorne, not just by staying, but by showing me that I was worth staying for. You taught me that tragedy does not have to define us, that we can choose love even when we are afraid, that blessing and curse are often just a matter of perspective. And look at what we built," she continued, gesturing to the family gathered around them. "4 amazing children who are making their own marks on the world, beautiful grandchildren who fill our lives with joy, a community that accepts and respects us, a life richer than I ever imagined possible. All because one man looked at the winter widow and saw not a curse, but a blessing." There was not a dry eye in the room. Xander stood and pulled Rebecca into his arms, kissing her forehead gently. "You were always a blessing," he said. "I just helped you remember that." The years continued to pass, bringing with them the usual mixture of joy and sorrow. Xander's sister Margaret died in 1910, and they made the journey to Tucson for the funeral. One of Samuel's horses won a major competition in 1911, bringing recognition to their ranch. Thomas's practice expanded, and he took on a partner to handle the increased workload. Grace and Emma both became involved in the suffrage movement, working to get women the vote. Through it all, Rebecca and Xander remained each other's constant. They had their disagreements, of course. Xander could be stubborn and Rebecca overly cautious, especially where the children were concerned. But they had learned over the years how to fight fair and forgive quickly. Their love had deepened into something unshakable, a foundation upon which their entire family was built. In 1915, as the world outside erupted into war, Rebecca and Xander celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary quietly at home. The children wanted to throw them a party, but they declined, preferring to spend the evening alone together. They sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant colors. Rebecca rested her head on Xander's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them content in the comfortable silence of long marriage. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning after you arrived?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "When I tried to warn you away." "I said a lot of things that first week," Xander replied with a chuckle. "You will have to be more specific." "You said I was not cursed, that I was just someone who had more than her share of sorrow," Rebecca recalled, "and that I deserved to be loved and cherished and protected." "I remember," Xander said softly. "And I was right, was I not?" "You were right," Rebecca agreed, "about everything. You were right that the curse was not real, that I deserved happiness, that we could build something beautiful together. You were right, and I am so grateful that you never gave up on me, even when I tried to push you away." "I could never have given up on you," Xander said. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done, Rebecca. Even when things were hard, even when the whole town was against us, loving you was simple and true and right." Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had been her husband for 32 years, her partner, her best friend, her everything. His hair was silver now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held that same warmth and steadiness that had drawn her in from the beginning. "I love you, Xander Hawthorne," she said. "More than words can express. You are my miracle." "And you are mine," Xander replied, kissing her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "My blessed Rebecca, the best thing that ever happened to me." As the sun dipped below the horizon and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Rebecca felt a deep sense of peace. She had lived through darkness and emerged into light. She had known terrible loss and incredible love. She had been called cursed but proven blessed beyond measure. The townspeople of Nogales no longer remembered the winter widow with fear. Instead, they saw Rebecca Hawthorne, respected matriarch of a large and loving family, skilled seamstress and teacher, woman who had overcome tragedy to build a beautiful life. And when they looked at her and Xander together, still clearly in love after 3 decades, they saw proof that choosing hope over fear, love over superstition, can transform everything. In their later years, Rebecca and Xander slowed down but never stopped enjoying life. They spent less time working the ranch as Samuel took over more of the operations, but they remained active and engaged. Rebecca continued to sew and teach, and Xander could often be found in the stable, training young horses with the patience that came from decades of experience. Their grandchildren multiplied, and then great-grandchildren began to arrive. Rebecca kept careful track of everyone in a large family Bible, recording births and marriages and deaths with meticulous care. She wanted future generations to know where they came from, to understand the love and sacrifice that had built this family. Thomas became one of the most respected doctors in Arizona Territory, eventually traveling to Phoenix to consult on difficult cases. Grace's nursing skills saved countless lives during the influenza pandemic of 1918. Emma's students went on to become teachers themselves, spreading her influence across the territory. And Samuel built the Hawthorne Ranch into one of the finest horse breeding operations in the region. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, the family threw Rebecca and Xander a massive party, despite their protests. It seemed like the entire town of Nogales showed up, along with friends and family from across Arizona. Rebecca, now 65, and Xander, now 66, were overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect. The mayor gave a speech about what an honor it was to have the Hawthornes as residents, about how they exemplified the best of the American spirit with their hard work, dedication to family, and unwavering commitment to each other. There was no mention of curses or tragedies, only celebration of a marriage that had endured and flourished for 4 decades. Later, when the party had wound down and most guests had left, Rebecca and Xander found themselves alone in their garden. The moon was full, casting silver light across the flowers Rebecca had planted over the years. 40 years, Rebecca marveled. How did we get so lucky, Xander? It was not luck, Xander said. It was choice. We chose each other, chose to fight for our love, chose to build this life together brick by brick. And we chose every single day to keep choosing each other. Best choice I ever made, Rebecca said, leaning into his embrace. Second best for me, Xander teased. Rebecca pulled back to look at him with mock indignation. Second best? What was the first? Deciding not to believe in curses, Xander said with a grin. That one was pretty important too. Rebecca laughed and swatted his arm playfully. Even after 40 years, he could still make her laugh, still surprise her, still fill her heart with joy. They lived to see Arizona become a state, to see the world change in ways they never could have imagined. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other and to the family they had created. Their love story became legend in Nogales, the tale of the fearless cowboy who refused to believe the winter widow was cursed, and in doing so, blessed both their lives beyond measure. Rebecca lived to be 73, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1931 with Xander holding her hand. He followed her 6 months later, unable to imagine life without his beloved wife. They were buried side by side in the Nogales Cemetery, their headstone reading simply, Xander and Rebecca Hawthorne, blessed, not cursed, together forever. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on their legacy, building lives of purpose and love throughout Arizona and beyond. And whenever anyone in the family faced fear or doubt, they remembered the story of how Xander Hawthorne looked at a woman the world called cursed and saw only blessing, and how that single act of faith and courage had changed everything. The old cabin where they first met was maintained by the family for generations, a reminder of where it all began. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the mountains just right, people swore they could feel the presence of 2 souls who had loved deeply, fought bravely, and proven that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to accept the limitations others try to place on your heart. Their love story was complete, a testament to the power of seeing beyond fear to possibility, of choosing hope over despair, of believing that blessing and curse are often just a matter of perspective. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Xander and Rebecca gave to each other and to all who knew them. The knowledge that love, true love, can overcome anything if you are brave enough to embrace it.